Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back once again to Samuel Adams Returns, the Anti-Federalist. They absolutely got it right here on Liberty Works Radio Network, where liberty does work for you. What I'm going to do this week is we're going to take and get into about, it may take us 3 or 4 weeks to get through the programming that I want to get into and in this particular topic. Because what I'm finding out there is that emotionalism is exceeding any sense of reason. And quite frankly, we're seeing that, I don't care what program it is, that's what's happening out there. But one of the things that I want to take and bring to you is that Liberty Works Radio Network is a fantastic network and is doing a lot, especially live programming in the local markets, the Maryland market. And I think there's some reprogramming that's going on down in Tennessee and a few other places where that live programming is getting rebroadcast. What I would like you to do is go ahead and definitely contribute to Liberty Works Radio Network. But we are going to be seeking and doing some additional efforts with Samuel Adams Returns programs and see if we can find some opportunities where we can bring you Samuel Adams Returns live and talking about what our historical truths are and what does that mean relative to today. As I've always told you, that's what this program is all about, is bringing those realities of what's happening to our nation all the way down to the local level today from that founder's truth and perspective, from our biblical truths and perspective, which in particular Samuel Adams had as, his moniker says, the last Puritan. What was that influence and what did that mean? So there's a lot there that we're doing. And with that, I'd like you to take and understand that we have been moving all of our hosting. And we moved our hosting to a very patriotic hosting company, one that also has hosted a lot of different churches and their videos for many years, and that is mediaserve.com. You'll see all of that in what I sent out to you already in my newsletter. So if you're not signed up for the newsletter, do that. You can go and email me at tom@samueladamsreturns.com and sign up for the newsletter, or you can sign up for the newsletter at samueladamsreturns.com. But more so, what I want you to take a look at and watch, because we're going to be making a lot of changes. We'll be making changes from something that I'm going to talk to you about in a moment on what's happening on YouTube even. And just the fact that we are getting off of Facebook, all of those types of events that will drive us more specifically to what we're doing, especially in our archiving page and where we're going to be doing more video blogging at samueladamsreturns.net. So if you really want to find out what's going to be happening with us and with Samuel Adams Returns, the Anti-Federalist got it right, you're going to have to go to samueladamsreturns.net. And, you know, I told you before, we started a new media company which includes eaglefirepost.com. Eaglefirepost.com is just in its inception. And you know what? I hope some folks will eventually move off and really hold to your principles and get off of Facebook and get off these other medias that are the masters of the universe, which I'm looking at an article right here where these technology masters, you've seen on the Laura Ingraham program what she talked about here this past week, but the masters of the universe they're doing their next purges. YouTube adding fact-checking and algorithms to videos that question global warming. So here we're seeing that your thoughts, your views, your ideology is being smacked straight in the face. Media Matters ramps up Facebook pressure. They're going after more of all of that. And the one that really gets me, and which we're going to be talking about very clearly, is things that Schumer is coming out again. Roe versus Wade is part of the American fabric of life. And he says that Trump has done real damage to the character of America. Well, not according to our founding fathers. In fact, the ones that have been doing the damage to America are the Schumers and all of these other ideologically driven, emotionally driven, immorally driven people. And we're going to talk about that as we get into the real meat of what the Anti-Federalists and the Federalists were talking about. You know, we have here talking about education. We have that Obama's education czar. He said if he had it to do over again, excuse me, he would have pushed even harder for Common Core. So here we have again the bending of the minds instead of real education. So much, so much. And once again, I have to say it over and over in the programs, is that Ecclesiastes 1:9 clearly states that there's nothing new under the sun. So where I want to start with you, and where I want to take this over the next few weeks, as well as I am going to do some blogs, video blog in between that'll be posted up on the website, is that what we have here in particular is that emotionalism versus reason. And what we have going on is party spirit, as George Washington talks about in his farewell address, is something that really takes and is a negative impact when it comes to governing. But we're not going to get away from it. And we don't get away from it by virtue of both what the Anti-Federalist wrote, as well as what we're going to talk about in particular, I think, which was a very, very solid response, or actually was a precursor to the Anti-Federalist paper that we're going to quickly discuss, is Madison's Federalist number 10. So let's kind of get on with it, because when we look at, and I could go over and over and over, all of the emotionalism that is here on all these different websites that we can look at, or all the media that's out there. You know, it's always easy to take people and drag them by the nose, if you will, if you take and you drive to the human emotion. It's kind of like when we had our farm. And it was a little ranch, ran a few head of cattle. One of the things that any cattleman will tell you is it's what you know how to do about taking that cow out of gear. So for you folks that don't understand that, you grab that cow by the tail and you jerk that tail up, and you can almost steer them in any direction you want to go. But there's a danger with all of that, because if you're not standing off to the side, you never know what's coming in your direction if you're standing behind. So, you know, that's what we get out of the media today. I don't care whether it's the Foxes, Doxes, ABCs, NBCs, all the other alphabet soup out there of media nonsense. One of the things we know is that they're all ideologically driven. And it's not going to stop. It's not going to stop. But I'm hoping that with Samuel Adams Returns and the new media environment that we're bringing, that we can bring reason back with founders' understanding and principles, so that you have the ability to make better decisions based on truth. Okay, so that's what we're about. Okay, let's see. Back in March 18th, 1788, the Federal Farmer wrote, and he wrote this after what Madison wrote, because this is 1788. What we're going to be talking about in detail in the next couple of segments will be Federalist number 10, which Madison wrote in 1787, March of 1787. This response is almost a year later. So I think it's very, very interesting that it took a year for everything to kind of gestate. But this is something that I thought was very interesting and as a baseline, kind of backwards, if you will, from what the Federalist farmer was saying. The opposite qualities of the first Confederation were rather caused by then the cause of two parties, which from its first existence began and have continued their operations. I believe, unknown to their country and almost unknown to themselves, as really but few men have the capacity or resolution to develop the secret causes which influence their daily conduct. You know, that's it. We see that everywhere. We see it all the way from the top of the Republican Party to the top of the Democrats to the top of the Libertarians to whatever party is out there. You know, you have this grouping of a few that, you know, they're doing stuff. And does that mean that everybody knows what they're doing? Absolutely not. And so when it comes down then to you and me and the general public, if we don't understand the fundamental principles of good governance, then boy, are we hosed. So he goes on to say the old Congress was a national government and a union of states, both brought into one political body. As these opposite powers, I do not mean parties, were so exactly blended and very nearly balanced, like every artificial operative machine where action is equal to reaction. Boy, he knew a little bit of physics there, didn't he? Action, reaction, doesn't balance out necessarily as a machine potentially could. It should perfectly still, and he thinks it should. It would not move at all. So that's the whole thing about government. When it gets to this perfect balance, it's not balanced. So those who were for national government were for increasing it. Those who thought any national government would be destructive to the liberties of America assisted those who thought it our only safety to put everything as wrong as possible. Requisitions were made which everybody knew it was impossible to comply with. So he goes on to talk about the despair of the states. The public honor was tarnished, and it was tarnished by the government, how it was abused by the servants and even the friends of government. So there is a lot here that we look at, and when we will come back into the next segment, we're going to touch on 3 of these potential areas, and I'm going to give you some real quick spots that this writer was talking about. He was talking about that America is presently divided into 3 classes or descriptions of men. In few years there will be but 2. My goodness gracious, isn't that pretty much what happened? That we have these 2 primary parties now in America with these other kind of splatterings of things out there. You know, he talked about a first class. Oh no, you know what? I'm not going to tease you with that or try and get into that because we're running out of time in this segment. But one of the things that he did talk about here is our citizens are now apprised of the progress of parties or political opinions on the continent. It is fit they should also be informed of the present state, force, and design of each other in order that they may form their decisions with safety to the public and themselves. This shall be given with all the precautions and impartiality that the author is capable of. So he's going to talk about this, and that's what we're going to get into as we get into the next segment. But one of the things that I want you to remember is that we are taking and moving a lot of things here at Samuel Adams Returns. We're going to be doing more archiving and video blogging at samueladamsreturns.net. And I want you to fully support, as you can, the works that are going on here at Liberty Works Radio Network. So go to libertyworksradionetwork.com or lwrn.net. You know, check out the programming and subscribe as you can, because I think that we have to look at these other alternatives in media and what we will be presenting as well to take and overcome I don't know that we will, but we have to make every effort to overcome these so-called masters of the universe. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this next segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, yes, they did. They did get it right, except a few times that I got to say Madison nailed it. Of course, Madison. Let's think about Madison for a moment. And I'm going to have to come back in the third segment because I can't get all of my names and educational perspective right off the top of my head. And as you know, I really don't do a lot of scripting. A lot of what I do is the commentary as it flows. So we're going to come back especially in depth on Madison. But what I wanted to do is finish up with the Anti-Federalist paper really quick and then jump into it with what Federalist number 10 is all about. So anyway, what we had here from our friend, he was talking about that the public honor was tarnished and our governments abused by their servants and best friends. In fine, it became a cant word, things are not yet bad enough to mend. However, as a great part of the important objects of society were entrusted to this mongrel species of general government, the sentiment of pushing it forward became general throughout America, and the late convention met at Philadelphia under the uniform impression that such was the desire of their constituents. And we've talked about some of this before, but I'm not going to get into it. We'll get into it in the other video blogs, what was going on here. But even then, the advantages and disadvantages of national government operated so strongly, although silently, on each individual, that the conflict was nearly equal. A third or middle opinion, which always arises in such cases, broke off and took the lead, the national party, thus assisted, pursued steadily their object. The federal party dropped off. So I want to take that second, because the federal party was not the Federalist. The federal party was really, as I've told you before, were the anti-federalists who really understood federalism. And that's what the Articles of Confederation were trying to really build, and what they were asking that the convention in Maryland and Philadelphia would amend to ensure that federalism stayed in place. Okay? So the federal party dropped off one by one. And finally, when the middle party came to view, the offspring which they had given birth to, and they're talking about what happened in Philadelphia, and in great measure reared, several of them immediately disowned the child. So we're talking about Mason, and we're talking about a few others that when they were at the convention were bringing this new constitution to bear, that child, but then as it came to the end of it, they refused to sign it. In fact, the whole New York delegation, except for Hamilton, walked away from the convention and refused to sign it because of what they saw that was coming out of it. Such has been hitherto the progress of party, or rather of the human mind dispassionately contemplating our separate and relative situation, and aiming at the perfect completion of social happiness and grandeur, which perhaps can be combined only in ideas. Isn't that interesting? Every description of men entertain the same wishes, accepting perhaps a few very bad men of each. They forever will differ about the mode of accomplishment, and some must be permitted to doubt the practicability. And as I mentioned earlier, I'll finish with this right now. As our citizens are now apprised of the progress of parties or political opinions on the continent, it is fit they should also be informed of the present state, force, and designs of each other, in order that they may form their decisions with safety to the public and themselves. This shall be given with all the precisions and impartiality the author is capable of. So what we have going on is that in responding to what I have to confess is that Madison, in what we're going to delve into here in Federalist number 10, this response is very, very interesting because it does talk about party spirit. It talks about all of the human aspects of things. And Madison is very, very clear on this. And we're going to get to it because then, and we're not even going to be able to get to all of it because there's so much here, and I am going to interject. So, unlike some of the others out there, I am going to tell you up front that I am going to try and explain more from that historical perspective and bring that to the realities of today in this historical documents to show that, you know what, we're not up against a lot of new stuff. Where it is new is what Madison argues on, and we'll get to, is that what we call the socialist, the communist, the Marxist, the ideas are not new. Marx just kind of lumped them all into stuff, but they were totally and absolutely rejected by the founders, especially Madison and others that put the Constitution together, because it doesn't work. And we know it doesn't work. But we have to go with what we have here, what the Anti-Federalist talks about, and we'll get to in a moment, is that of the human mind dispassionately contemplating all of these, separate and relative situations. Wow. So I am going to read, because I think if I try and just blah, blah, blah and explain it to you, that's all you'll get is blah, 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 and you'll sit there and go, well, how does that work? Well, as we're considering all of the news and the media and the hype and all that's going on in governance and trying to ascertain, again, how do we live in a constitutional republic? That's what we have. And we know that every state is a constitution, has its constitution, and we are, in essence, republics. Every state is a republic. And we're all part of this greater union, this greater republic, these United States, or as now, the United States. So Madison's continuing on a subject and talking about the safeguards against domestic factions and insurrection. So I'm not going back to 9 yet, but that'll play in, somewhere in all of this discussion, because factions lead to insurrection, and we're seeing that. Intifa or Antifa or whatever they're called, we're seeing that. We're seeing insurrection, if you will, by every what is being termed out there leftist organization and people group that is even a Hollywood crowd. What's her name? What was it, Cat? Rosie O'Donnell? Yeah. Leftist, or she doesn't even know what she is. She can't even figure out what she is in her thought processes, let alone what she is politically, except she hates everything that our founders purposed and intended for good governance. So that is causing insurrection. They're calling for it more and more. So let's get on to what Madison's talking about here. And he's actually writing to the people of the state of New York. So it's very, very interesting that he's being specific as to who he's writing to. And this is November 23rd, 1787. Among the numerous advantages promised by the well-constructed Union, none deserves to be more accurately developed than its tendency to break and control the violence of faction. The friend of popular governments never finds himself so much alarmed for their character and fate as when he contemplates their propensity to this dangerous vice. He will not fail, therefore, to set a due value on any plan which, without violating the principles to which he is attached, provides a proper cure for it. We're going to get into this, but I had to stop for a moment because we're talking about we have to find principles. We have to develop within those principles. So the instability, injustice, and confusion introduced into the public councils have, in truth, been the mortal diseases under which popular governments have everywhere perished. And they continue to be the favorite and fruitful topics from which the adversaries to liberty derive their most specious declamations. When he gets into it, when he's talking about, when we look at popular governments, he's talking about the government driven by the populace, or he is talking about what, everybody, including, the Democrats flat out call it, but the Republicans, many of them call it as well, is that we are not a constitutional republic according to these, especially media types, but we're a democracy. So popular government translates to democracy, which translates to faction, which translates to insurrection, which translates to despotism and tyranny. Okay? So, again, all of those that talk about us as a democracy, and Schumer, and all of those that talk about, Trump attacking our democracy, yeah, because we're not a democracy, so it should be attacked as a democracy and restored as a constitutional republic. So with that little diatribe there, let's move on to what Madison was continuing to talk about. He says the valuable improvements made by the American constitutions on the popular models. So there we're talking about all the different states coming out of England, developing individual state constitutions, and what? On the popular models, all right? Both ancient and modern cannot certainly be too much admired, but it would be an unwarrantable partiality to contend that they have as effectually obviated the danger on this side as was wished and expected, that danger being factions. Complaints are everywhere heard from our most considerate and virtuous citizens. Virtuous citizens? We have virtuous citizens. Anyway, equally, the friends of public and private faith. Boy, we have a lot of that going on too. What's going on with the churches. We'll get back to that. And of public and personal liberty, that our governments are too unstable, that the public good is disregarded in the conflicts of rival parties, that the measures are too often decided not according to the rules of justice and the rights of the minor party, but by the superior force of an interested and overbearing majority. Boy, does that sound like today? However anxiously we may wish that these complaints had no foundation, the evidence of known facts will not permit us to deny that they are in some degree true. Ladies and gentlemen, this is where we look at all of the different emotionalism that goes into the arguments. What I saw on Laura Ingram's program this past week was really good, as she was, talking about what was happening with the Googles, Facebooks, YouTubes, all of the other, I don't remember, imprint, what's that imprint one, Cathy? I don't remember, where they taken, whatever. There's a whole bunch of them out there, and just as I opened up with today, was that now YouTube's going to put in their algorithms to start looking at, climate change and other things like that. Madison is talking about all of these different factions and kind of the root of them and the questioning of them, even by those that are faith-based, those that are virtuous citizens, if we have any of those, and so on, and trying to come up with, okay, how do we deal with it? How do we take care of this? Because, there are degrees of truth out there. Probably now in our modern time, there's more degrees of truth about the injustices and all of that, only because the democracy pros and the Democrats and Republicans, those that use the word democracy often, are the ones that have fostered it. So when we come back into this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns, now you see why we're going to have to do other programs in between the weekly one. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to this last segment of Samuel Adams Returns. Those anti-federalists, they got it right. But in this case, I got to tell you that, Madison here in Federalist number 10 is laying it out very, very well. And just to surmise or summarize, is depending on where you are in the world, is that to summarize what we went through just in the first paragraph, if you will, not even completing the first paragraph of Federalist number 10, is that he kind of lays out this whole thing where there's people that are questioning what's going on. Where is justice? Where is truth? Where are these principles upon which we should be able to live and govern? And you had a whole group of people that he talked about. He asked, hey, the virtuous citizens, those that are of public friends of public and private faith, of public and personal liberty. What's going on? The government's unstable. Well, what makes it happen? What are we dealing with when it comes to this whole idea of factions and insurrection? And he kind of ends it off with, however, and where I ended it and commented and left you deadpanned, is that, we have to have more programming, and the video blogging is what we'll be doing on SamuelAdamsReturns.net, because we just can't get through all of this stuff in a 1 hour program here. But the point of it all is that he goes, how anxiously we may wish that these complaints had no foundation. The evidence of known facts will not permit us to deny that they are in some degree true. And then he continues, it will be found, indeed, on a candid review of our situation, that some of the distresses under which we labor have been erroneously charged on the operation of our governments. But it will be found at the same time that other causes will not alone account for many of our heaviest misfortunes, and particularly for that prevailing and increasing distrust of public engagements and alarm for private rights, which are echoed from one end of the continent to the other. These must be chiefly, if not wholly, effects of the unsteadiness and injustice with which a factious spirit has tainted our public administration. Wow. That describes exactly what we have today. No different. Nothing new under the sun. So what we have is that we're looking at what is going on, even from the idea of public engagement. We're seeing now that you can't even speak, that you can't even on all the social media, YouTube, I don't care what it is, in the media and / press, that our opinions, especially opinions that have a constitutional formation, because I refuse to use conservative, I just have to do a quick shout out to Chris Arnzon at Iron Sharpens Iron, and I suggest that you listen to his program every day from 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. if you have the opportunity. It's Iron Sharpens Iron. He had me on last Friday on my book, and I'm pointing to it over my shoulder here. Not all conservatives are constitutionalists. I'm not talking about conservatives being cut off. I'm not talking about leftists even whining on Facebook about whatever they whine about. But what I am talking about is truth and consistency in minimizing factions. And that's what we're getting here in Federalist number 10. And Madison is identifying some of the fundamentals of that. So I would, again, recommend that you go to the link and that you, if you have not, that you download both the Anti-Federalist number 10 and Federalist number 10, in particular Federalist number 10, so that you can really get the gist of this. And excuse me while I take a real quick sip here. Those that can see me on the video see that I had a nice sip of coffee, and I hope you heard the from all of my listeners there. Throat's a little dry. I'm still recovering from having a sore throat last week. So let me go on, because here's where Madison really gets it. He says, he's defining it. He goes, by a faction. I understand a number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or a minority of the whole, who are united and actuated by some common impulse of passion or of interest, adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent and aggregate interest of the community. So they're adverse, okay? So there's three ideas, I think, in here. First off, this isn't the idea, this is the who. The who doesn't matter. Whether it's the majority or the minority, doesn't matter, okay? Factions are what they are. But here's our definers. They are first united and actuated. That means they're united and they're moving in a cause. They're moving. They're doing something. They're in action, okay? By some common impulse of passion. And that's what I talked about in the last two segments, is that human nature, which we're going to talk about, our Federal Farmer talked about human nature, and once again we're going to talk about human nature here, is that by some passion is what causes that action and coming together, that uniting, or of an interest. What's that interest? Oh, it's global change, global weather change. No, it's not global, or it's this, or it's that, or. You know what? If we really put the oars in the water and really got it going, you move that boat fast enough, if we start moving in the same direction with all those oars, heck, you don't need stupid windmills. The wave action enough would be a better source of power. Anyway, let's see. He then talks about it's adverse. So here's the third point. It's adverse to the rights of other citizens. It's adverse to the permanent and aggregate interest of the community. So twofold adversities that factions are all about. Okay? Twofold adversities that factions are all about. And that is to other citizens or to those of permanent and aggregate interest of a community. There's two methods of curing the mischief of factions. The one, by removing the causes. The other, by controlling its effects. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not going to be able to get through all of this. That's why you're going to have to read it. But I will give commentary on it next week, because I think we're at, about 7 minutes left? About, six minutes left in the program. So I want to read through this, and I'll try and minimize my commentary. So there's two ways of controlling it. There are again two methods of removing the causes of faction. The one, by destroying the liberty which is essential to its existence. The other, by giving to every citizen the same opinions, the same passions, the same interests. Oh my goodness, that sounds like communism. Oh, on the second one, that is. The first one, wow, that's taking away liberty? I don't think so. It could never be more truly said than of the first remedy, that it is worse than the disease. Liberty is to faction what air is to fire. We're going to sit on this one, and you're going to have all week to think about it. Are you ready? Liberty is to faction what air is to fire, an ailment without which it instantly experiments. And what he's saying is an element, but the way they spelled element was with an A. but it is element. An element without which it instantly expires. But it could not be less folly to abolish liberty, which is essential to political life because it nourishes faction, than it would be to wish the annihilation of air, which is essential to the animal life because it imparts to fire its destructive agency. Wow. When I read this, I imagined as George Washington was writing his farewell address, and in there is that quote about that, politics, if you will, or government, if you will, is like fire. But it's useful and it's dangerous. I'm paraphrasing. You go look it up for yourself, the George Washington quote, because that is amazing, because Washington and Madison were very, very close friends. And so I would be thinking that here it is, as Washington is leaving, he's reminiscing different things. He's reminiscing what happened at the convention. He's reminiscing how government was being put into action and all of these arguments that were going on during the Federalist, anti-Federalist papers just to get to having the Constitution come into effect. And we talk about faction, and what Madison's talking about, just to summarize as we're getting into our last few minutes here, is that it's citizens, you, me, people, coming together. And it doesn't matter whether you're a majority or a minority. It doesn't matter whether you're Antifa, Black Lives Matter, or you're the Conservative Union, or you're this or you're that, okay? What matters is you're united and you're activated by some common impulse or passion or interest. So, quite frankly, everybody that is involved some way or another is a part of a faction. All right. But what he's talking about here is these factions have adversity. They, in this case, are adverse to the rights of other citizens and to the permanent and aggregate interests of the community. He talks about, how do you remove them? How do you control them? What do you do with factions? He talks about a couple methods. One, by destroying the liberty which is essential to its existence, and the other, by giving every citizen the same opinion, the same passions, the same interest. Either of those solutions really aren't solutions. And then what I really appreciate is he gets into this, which the comparison and what I was talking about relative to Washington, is liberty is to faction what air is to fire. And he goes that if you try and remove it, and what we're seeing that we're happening in the social media environment, this whole idea of the masters of the universe environment, is that they're under the guise of tolerance, under the guise of ideologies, which would be the second one. The second ideology that's happening in the media is to make sure that every citizen has the same opinion, the same passions, the same interest. That's what's happening out there with all of the technocrats, all of the techno bosses, if you will, the political technology leaders, is they're trying to solve it by effect. They're trying to control the effects of people like me, people like you that are listening to this program, others that may be so-called conservatives, or others that are truly constitutionalists. But if you take away, and let's drive to this whole idea, you can't take away liberty, because that's snuffing out life. And we've talked about it. Sam Adams has talked about that liberty is that God-given gift. And I always say, and Sam Adams did also, is that true liberty comes through Jesus Christ, because he says he gives liberty, he removes slavery. Geez, that's what the others are fighting against, because Madison also understood that truth. And we'll talk about that I didn't talk about it in this segment. I didn't go look it up for you, so you'll have to wait till next week, or you'll have to jump into the video blog. But Madison's teacher was a president at Princeton. So with that, we're going to come back and keep our liberty. Here, Samuel Adams Returns, those anti-federalists, yes, they did. They got it right.